Hi there, I'm Ahsan Ali, a Shaw, and you're watching on YouTube and Facebook Live. Today we are going to talk about theory of evolution by natural selection, or and rethinking the theory of evolution. And when I say theory of evolution by natural selection, it is one of the best theory in the history of science because it has been supported by many evidences from various field of sciences like genetics, geology, paleontology, and developmental biology. Anyways, theory of evolution by natural selection was presented by Charles Darwin in 1859, and he says that evolution is the process through which organisms change over time by the changes in their behavior and physical traits. And those changes allow them to to better evolve to in order to survive and have offspring. And theory of evolution by natural selection has two parts. First, all living beings here on Earth are connected with each other. And secondly, the diversity of life we see here on Earth is a product of modification of population by natural selection, where some traits are favored in by the environment over the other. And when I say natural selection is a process of small changes that happens over time. And when those changes happen in the mass population, whether it's in terms of size or color, and we call it a microevolution. And that those small changes happen in the mass population through many generations, and there we call it microevolution. When the microevolution could lead towards the creation of could cause the creation of entire new species, that we call it macroevolution. And today we are going to talk about, because it is just a theory. Now we are going to look at this theory from various perspectives and rethink the theory of evolution. And to discuss this topic, my guest is Edward Konowicz. He has joined us from Virginia, United States. Hey
Hi,
Ed,
Ahsan Ali and everybody.
how are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's a little cool,
Hmm.
but it's still a nice day. How are you
Hmm.
doing?
Well, I'm doing good. It's morning here. I woke up early, an hour. We are going live an hour early than our usual time. It's good. It's still dark outside, morning dark. The sun hasn't come out yet. It will be an hour from now. So, rethinking evolution.
Yeah, I think we have to reconsider modern research. We haven't
Mhm,
really changed Darwin's theory that species adapt to an environment, which is
mhm,
natural selection. Those that have the stronger beaks as birds can crack the bigger nuts, and
mhm.
therefore this characteristic is encouraged in generations. I think this is outdated. I don't think it's true anymore.
Uh,
And I'm going to explain
eh,
why. I
mhm,
think what we're dealing with is species interact with the environment
mhm.
and
Yes,
they
indeed.
communicate with it. And part of what people have led to believe is our thinking, our memories, how we behave, how we look at the world is based on electrical activity in the brain.
Mhm,
But really, all the electrical activity is chemistry. We communicate between our neurons with neural transmitters such as
mhm,
acetylcholine, and
mhm,
norepinephrine, epinephrine, serotonin.
mhm,
So we use dopamine, L-dopamine. We use a lot of different B vitamins actually serve as neurotransmitters. We use a lot of different chemistry, and those the chemistry, the molecules, are to some extent words and sentences. We use words over again, like the word word. I might use
Mm-hmm.
it 2 or 3 times in a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So
Uh,
the chemistry at the neurotransmitters at what's called the synapse is
mm-hmm.
not, do you have one or more, one or not enough, one neurotransmitter. You have a ratio of transmitters, just like we have a
Because
ratio of words in our um, thinking and our speaking. Now, what that
yes.
means is plants communicate with each other through their roots, through chemicals,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
we communicate.
I was reading a research that plants, their roots, they also connected with each other. The plants also communicate with each other.
Yeah, and they communicate
Mm-hmm.
with pollen too.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, we this is hard for us to believe. Plants have
Mm-hmm.
sex at a distance. See,
Mm-hmm.
we engage with someone that to
Mm-hmm.
reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
Plants use bees and bugs to carry the pollen from one plant to another, but that's
Yes.
communicating.
Yes.
So, when we're looking at communication, we're looking
Mm-hmm.
at the movement of molecules of chemistry. That's even
Mm-hmm.
our adrenaline when we feel we want to fight or
What about
flee.
genetics? What about our genes? There were no
Yeah,
development in that. Yes.
our
And
genes
there was no,
communicate.
yes,
This is
they
what,
do.
we have this idea, oh, there's DNA packed in the
Mm-hmm.
cell,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a program that the cell runs and
Mm-hmm.
develops its parts of the cell, regenerates itself. It's just a
Mm-hmm.
program. We don't
Mm-hmm.
see DNA as communicating,
Yes.
but
And
that's what
uh,
viruses are. We're
mhm,
constantly communicating with viruses and bacteria. Even
mhm,
bacteria have DNA, and they conjugate, which is two bacteria align, and they exchange genetic material. Bacteria communicate with DNA and RNA. We
mhm.
communicate. It's called viruses. Some of
Yes.
the communication is good with viruses, some
Mhm,
are bad. Even plants communicate
mhm,
with DNA to us. They're called
mhm,
prions, little small
mhm,
segments, smaller than even a virus.
mhm.
Plants actually communicate. So we're in this static mechanical view of the cell. It's been modernized to be like a computer, which is the DNA is the program that's running, but we
Mhm.
haven't really updated to be that DNA is a communication mechanism.
So, how does it affect the communication mechanism and
I
the
think there's two
chemical
ways.
reaction? How does it
I,
impact the evolution?
well, what has to be done is there's bears all over the United States and
Mhm,
China and Asia. And how
mhm,
does a species evolve the same? I mean, there's a
mhm,
little variation in different areas,
mhm,
but the bears or the squirrels or the
mhm.
rats, they basically stay the same, which I would call part of convergent evolution. So they must be communicating somehow to stay the same. Otherwise, they would become different species. If Darwin
Mhm,
was correct,
mhm,
then all these species would be diverging. It would be very difficult when a species moves to a new environment, given natural selection and adaptation to an environment, be very difficult not for them to diverge into a different species because they're now in a different environment.
And it has risen a very good question here because I have asked this question to many people and I got not a very good answer. The question is because if we look at Chinese and those people are the same, they have been the same for centuries. Okay, African people, they are the same. Indian people, they have the same ancestry and the color and size. It has been the same. When the European, it has been same for centuries. Why it hasn't changed? Why the human species haven't evolved? We see the different colors, different races, different those different races. They are the same, and they have been going on for centuries. We see a small changes when different races they reproduce. We see small changes, but we don't see it in the uh, or the mass population
Right.
or the
There's
creation
something,
of or the creation of new species.
we get pictures
Mhm,
of Genghis Khan
mhm,
and Kublai Khan as if they look Chinese. They did not.
mhm,
They had red
mhm,
hair and blue
mhm,
eyes.
mhm,
They were a simulated. But what's a simulation? We think a simulation is interbreeding,
mhm,
that people are having sex and the Oriental traits are dominant. So then
mhm,
the red hair and the blue eyes of the Mongolians
mhm,
were recessed out, that the dominant genes dominated. But
mhm,
it may be more, we pick up our genes from other people. We don't have to have sex from them. I mean, the old
mhm,
thing when I was a kid, we would notice that some people look like their dogs. They started to have facial characteristics like their dog. The dog and the owner started to look alike. But we exchange, um, I think, DNA with our pets and the animals and the trees. That's even the
mhm,
pollen. The pollen is communication from the plants,
mhm,
and some people are allergic because they disagree with the communication.
mhm,
If you agree with the communication, the virus or the bacteria or the pollen doesn't cause immunity reaction. The fundamental way the immunity was described is it recognizes self and non self, which is it
mhm,
attacks that which does not identify as being oneself. So you're not allergic generally to members of your family, but you could be
mhm,
allergic to other people. You can
mhm,
be allergic to peanuts.
mhm,
And I think it has to do with what we're really dealing with is DNA has several functions. The
mhm,
elegance of nature is that many things take on several functions. They just don't do one thing.
mhm,
And for example,
mhm,
our feet and the feet of other animals helps us
mhm,
walk and run. They
mhm,
also help us kick. They're also
mhm,
weapons.
mhm,
And for some people, it used to help them count, count the number of fingers on your hands
mhm,
or whatever. So we have a base 10 number system. We have 10 fingers and 10 toes. I don't think that's coincidence.
mhm,
I think that's the result of that. But evolution
mhm,
isn't as we were taught because some animals do not evolve. You can look
mhm,
at dragonflies 100 million years ago. They may be a little bit bigger, but they didn't change.
mhm.
And you have
What
to
about
ask,
the whales?
the whales, they got bigger and bigger because they were in water
Mhm,
and they've learned to, of course, communicate with sound, but they
mhm,
live to be 200 or 300 years of age.
mhm,
And I think that's because they find or able to put themselves in more agreement. I think the more stress you have is the more conflict you have. But let me get back to it. Some animals,
mhm,
like alligators, they don't change much. Human
mhm,
beings changed a lot if you look at the different characteristics from the pygmies to the Watusis, and they're even
mhm,
close to each other. Pygmies about
mhm,
4 feet tall, Watusis or Tusis are sometimes called 6 foot 6, 7 feet tall.
mhm,
So we have a lot of variations sometimes and not, and I think it's based on communication.
mhm.
If
What about
DNA is a communication system, we would
Mhm.
expect the different races of people to speak similar languages. So we see the Oriental race speak, Chinese, Japanese, and use
Mhm.
pictograms. We see the white race speak
Mhm.
English, German, Russian, and they use
Mhm.
letters to
Mhm.
communicate. They don't use pictures.
Mhm.
And whatever race the Egyptians were that used hieroglyphics may have been the change that Moses, the Hebrew, saw when he went with the scribes and they were writing out with letters Hebrew. It may have changed the racial characteristics. So the species or DNA may be the worldview or how the world is seen and communicated, which is everything's in communication, and it's more a communication mechanism than an identity. Now, this is what's always bothered me. I've heard this for 30 years or
Mhm.
more, that the
Mhm.
DNA of a chimpanzee is only 2% different than the DNA of a human being. Well, there's more than 2% difference between us and a chimpanzee.
Mhm.
I mean, a
Oh, oh.
chimpanzee doesn't walk like us. It doesn't
Mhm.
have skin like us. It
Mhm.
doesn't form villages and
Mhm.
cities like us. It doesn't use as much tools as we use. There's more
Mhm.
than 2% difference between us and a chimpanzee.
Oh, there's also a question. If we have evolved from the chimpanzee, then why chimpanzees are alive today? Why they haven't evolved just like us?
Yeah, why didn't gorillas start forming towns? Why
Yeah,
didn't they start making huts? Why didn't
yes.
monkeys
Mhm.
start storing food and protecting it?
It's a
So,
very good question because if we have evolved from them, then why didn't they evolve? If we have evolved, then they would have evolved over time. There was no monkeys alive here on Earth, but they do. And why they haven't? So why they haven't evolved? It's a very good question.
yeah, because I mean, what more can a raccoon do? You're either a
Mm-hmm,
raccoon or not a raccoon. And you could
mm-hmm,
have been that for 50 million years. And the same
mm-hmm,
thing with a monkey. You could have been a monkey
mm-hmm,
for 50 million years. Nothing's
mm-hmm,
really changed. So, why did
mm-hmm,
human beings evolve and change?
mm-hmm,
I mean, I have what I've been saying up to now, I think, is if you look at the scientific literature, is fairly accurate. What I'm going
mm-hmm.
to say now is my guess.
Okay. Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I, I think
Us-
there's I think there is some form of transmigration of soul. I don't like to
mhm,
say reincarnation because I think the soul is made of many parts like our body. So I think our heart has a soul, our liver
mhm,
has a soul. They have different
mhm,
DNA
mhm,
and they communicate. I mean, viruses sometimes only affect one part of the body.
mhm,
Hepatitis viruses only affect the liver.
mhm,
Warts tend to affect the skin. So they're in a way a different being that is coordinating with us. And is
mhm,
coordinating because we have common aspects to DNA.
mhm,
Now, we're a consciousness, and there's
mhm,
different levels of development of person's consciousness. Now, we see things in terms of words, but
mhm,
really, most of thinking is more in terms of feelings or emotions.
mhm,
So, our dogs that have similar emotions to us can get
mhm,
close to us. Dogs
mhm,
can be sad, they can be happy, they can be
mhm,
affectionate. So, they have similar emotions, so they're compatible with our, our DNA. Monkeys are a little more troublemakers than us. They like,
mhm,
you know, busting up things, running around. They belong in the wild. Not many
mhm,
people have pets as monkeys because they're
mhm,
too hard to contain or train. They're 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 too mischievous.
mhm. They are
But
just like
getting
child children.
but what I'm saying is there's different levels of consciousness develop. So some
Mhm,
consciousness is very primitive. They can't evolve. They're going to be an alligator. You need
mhm,
that alligator for that primitive consciousness to birth.
mhm,
So some consciousness like a shark or an alligator is not going to evolve. We are one of the top totems. There's a totem pole
mhm,
in American natives of the Northwest, Washington, Oregon, Canada, Alaska. They have
mhm,
different animals, and a top animal or an apex predator could be an eagle, could
mhm,
be a human being, could be a bear, could be a
mhm,
lion. The apex predators are at the spearhead. So the human
mhm,
beings at the spearhead or the fountain top of evolution because we're evolving higher functions as higher consciousness is evolving and needs
mhm,
to birth. But I didn't think DNA is communication. RNA and DNA, we're communicating within our body with viruses, which is we have viruses in our DNA. And under
mhm,
certain radiations, they can be activated. Now, the problem is how does a heart cell stay a heart cell and not become a liver cell or a
mhm,
stomach cell? And that's because a certain segment of the DNA, which is an inductor, lasers and actually emits a frequency like a laser. And
mhm,
that frequency other cells tune to. You put a carcinogen on those cells and it alters the frequency. And then you can
mhm,
get an undifferentiated growth like cancer in the liver, not in the heart.
mhm,
Heart's more communicable, is more electrical. Isn't it strange? You don't get cancer of the heart much. You get cancer
mhm,
of the lungs, cancer of the stomach, cancer of the genitals, but you don't get cancer of the heart because the heart's more like the brain, except that it has one pulse. It's much more
mhm,
summarized or integrated in its feeling or thinking. And because of the higher level of integration and communication, we don't
mhm,
see cancer of the heart. It's
mhm,
very rare. And
mhm.
modern science doesn't explain it.
Mhm. There are
I mean,
many
we have,
things modern science doesn't explain. Just like I like the theory of evolution, with the help of ancient aliens theory. I think we have discussed it in our previous one of earliest episodes, and I think it's relevant here to discuss it. That the ancient aliens theorists, they say that there was some kind of genetic engineering was involved in the creation of the modern human beings that we are today. Uh, the, that that genetic engineering happened billions of years ago, and they took the chimpanzees from the earth and they genetically evolved or modified uh, the the living being from the earth, and they created us, and they give the proof of just like the pyramids of around the world. There are many pictures that they they have a body of there are many pictures that they have a body of human being and the head of a dog, alligator, or other animals. It means those pictures tell us that there were some type of genetic engineering was going on thousands of years ago, and our ancestors didn't know that, and they depicted those pictures, and because they knew they saw those things and they depicted it on the walls and they created statues, but they didn't know that the science behind it. So I like that theory that some part of us is from the earth and the other part is from something else, from some higher intelligence species.
well, we
So
need
we
to
are the.
recognize there may be
Mhm,
three types,
mhm,
get my
mhm.
fingers correct, three
Okay.
types of
Mhm,
genetic engineering. First, there's
mhm,
breeding,
mhm,
which is dairy cows,
mhm,
dogs, cats have been bred by human beings without any understanding of DNA
mhm,
by artificial selection.
mhm,
So breeding has been going on by artificial selection of
mhm,
individuals and promoting those individuals.
mhm,
And the second way genetic engineering may go on, which is
mhm,
my theory, is by interaction. The more we interact with a species, and this was shown with fox, you
mhm,
start having a pet as a fox and you're raising the fox repeatedly, the fox will
mhm,
begin looking more and more like a dog
mhm,
because of its interaction with you. And it may be the same with wolf. The wolf
mhm,
and the fox may both have evolved into the dog via interaction with human beings
mhm,
by getting some of our DNA. The third way is by injecting DNA or
mhm,
RNA. You can have retrovirus RNA, which is able to use reverse transcriptase and then
mhm,
alter the DNA. So
mhm,
this current CV injections around the world may be a continual attempt to genetically modify human beings, to
mhm,
be more subservient, be
mhm,
more obedient like a dog. So we
mhm,
may be, right now, there may be a major attempt to genetically modify human beings again.
mhm,
So that alien theory, oh, aliens have genetically created human beings.
mhm.
Well, it may be going on right now.
Yes,
And I think
and
we have to consider that. But we have to
mhm,
also consider part of the genetic engineering is the
mhm,
censorship,
mhm,
which is to censor thinking, to censor ideas, may be genetic engineering.
mhm.
We need to begin
And
seeing DNA is just not a program that makes parts of the cell. DNA is a communication system
mhm,
that communicates within the body,
mhm,
communicates to other things.
mhm,
So we're dealing with ideas. So the
mhm,
immunity system, which is based on chromosome 6,
mhm,
may be dealing with ideas. What ideas are compatible with us, which our ideas are not. And those in power are trying to control what is considered to be compatible ideas by
mhm,
censorship. So censorship may be a form of genetic engineering enhanced
mhm,
by viral engineering through injecting people. So right
mhm,
now, major genetic engineering may be occurring by controlling the communication through censorship and by modifying the DNA by direct injections.
mhm. It's a wild conjecture, but okay. And I think we have covered enough. We have started our journey from, we have to start our discussion from theory of
Yeah, but let
evolution
me let
and
me do finish. We got 2 more
okay,
minutes.
okay.
The DNA may represent our uniqueness, which is our will. What do we
Mhm,
want? Our
mhm,
will is what do we want, which is based on our uniqueness. I mean, some
mhm,
people want music, some people want a nice car, some
mhm.
people want to travel. Um, and
Just
so
like just like Jackie mentioned here, transference of energies from one to another.
the, the transferred DNA
Mhm,
or is a communication to break our will or uniqueness because we
mhm,
have certain amount of DNA in common.
mhm,
And the important thing is, I think that we defend our uniqueness, which is human rights.
mhm,
So by the state trying to impose its will, it's trying to make us more a herd animal. It's trying to reduce our uniqueness
mhm,
and engineer us so that we think as we're supposed to think, which
mhm,
is the censorship is to break our will and impose the will of those in power. And that
mhm,
may also be the genetic engineering via the injection. So we may be in a brave new world in which those in power are trying to create an obedient class of people that will
Hmm.
do their will.
I think it's not gonna happen, but okay, keep trying. Human
They're trying.
beings,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And we have another comment here. Human beings are made up of mostly water. Baby have their highest percentage of water when they are born. It's true. It's from Linda Gilmore.
Yeah, I
And
think water represents dreaming.
mhm,
So
water is
living
life.
things that dream are made of water, but
Hmm.
water only maintains memory for a very short time. So
Hmm.
we've doped water with other molecules like carbon and nitrogen and
Hmm.
um, and iron, so that we can maintain longer memories. So yeah, I
Hmm.
think we're water beings, and
Hmm.
water can change. It dreams, so it changes, as
Yes.
opposed to other things like rocks and mercury. They stay
Hmm.
basically the same, and water evaporates, it freezes, takes on different shapes, it takes
Hmm.
on different forms, and then it combines with other molecules to form rocks
Hmm.
and parts of us.
Hmm. I think, yes, indeed, water is life, and we are the water being, and it is true to some extent. And we have to today we have discussed the role of communication in the evolution. It has various examples. We have discussed that it plays a significant role in the modification or in the evolution process. And if you have any questions, just I think we have to discuss this topic again. To discuss it, it is a very short time to discuss it,
Yeah.
but we'll discuss it from the other angle and next week or some other time. If you have any questions or any comment, please leave it in the comment box below. I'll get back to you. Ed will answer to you as soon as he can. And final comment here from I think I should include it. Interesting that water molecules can be made of scientifically, yes. And yes, cannot. Okay, cannot. Correct it. Thank you. Thank you, and have a good day, good night, wherever you are.